The trailer for Danny Boyle's 28 Years Later has absolutely blown up since it was released a few weeks ago. It's quickly become the most anticipated movie of 2025 for many horror fans, with a sequel also set for a January 2026 release. So we got lots of zombies, although I know Danny Boyle doesn't like to use the Z word, so let's say infected guys coming to us pretty soon. However, until recently, Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later has been completely unavailable for streaming and has actually been out of print on Blu-ray due to rights issues. So why is that? Well, it's because Sony, who's distributing the sequels, acquired the rights to the original film, which was first distributed by Fox Searchlight, which is now owned by Disney, and had it pulled. Although the sequel, 28 Weeks Later, which Disney owns outright, is still available. And in fact, there have been some questions arising whether or not that movie is actually still going to be considered canon in the franchise.
Have you come into direct contact with the infected?
Now, with the 28 Years Later trailer totally reinvigorating interest in the franchise, Sony has finally re-released the original film to streaming services like iTunes, albeit in a basic HD transfer, which might surprise some fans who've been anticipating a 4K re-release. However, there's a good reason why this 4K upgrade just might never happen.
Can't just take any crap.
Basically, it all comes down to the way the 28 Days Later was actually shot, way back with primitive digital technology. Let me explain. Recently, Arrow Video re-released Robert Rodriguez's Mexico trilogy on Blu-ray, but only Desperado was in 4K. Many wondered why Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which was a pretty big budget movie way back when, wasn't getting a 4K release. And the simple fact is, by virtue of it being shot digitally with 2003 era cameras, the movie's maximum resolution is actually 1080p. 28 Days Later is in a similar boat. It was one of the first films to be shot digitally. You see, 28 Days Later was actually shot very low budget. It only cost $8 million, which was kind of a pittance considering that Danny Boyle at the time was already somewhat of an A-list director. But you see, the movie he had done before 28 Days Later, The Beach, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, was a bit of a flop. But even still, him and the writer of the film, Alex Garland, upon whose book The Beach was based, struck up kind of an interesting friendship and decided to reteam on 28 Days Later, which was going to be kind of their elevated version of a horror film. You know, infamously them saying that, oh, there are no zombies in this movie, rather, people are infected. It was the first movie that actually had zombies, which is what they are, even if they don't call them that, moving really, really fast, which soon became a trend that everybody kind of tried to imitate. So given that they didn't have too much of a budget to work with, the decision was made to shoot the film digitally, which was something that was actually starting to happen back in the early 2000s, with George Lucas kind of the pioneer with this with his prequel trilogy, with him shooting Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith that way. Now, considering that they didn't have that much money, the cameras that they were using definitely were not as elaborate as the ones that George Lucas was able to use. As such, a lot of indies in that era that were shot in digital video look pretty terrible nowadays, such as Spike Lee's Bamboozled or the film Tadpole, which was a big Sundance hit in the early 2000s. You see, the camera that they used for 28 Days Later was called the Canon XL1, and it has a standard definition resolution of maximum 720p. That's why the movie really doesn't look all that different on Blu-ray than it does on DVD, because really all you're watching is an HD up conversion. As for a 4K release, the fact is 28 Days Later is never going to look as good as some horror fans might expect. It was just shot to look a certain way. Indeed, the grainy, even kind of ugly visuals kind of give the film an interesting vibe, which I think would be lost if they were to make it look absolutely terrific. And in fact, the sequels are being shot on iPhone, so, you know, Boyle is keeping it kind of low-tech, although, of course, you can do a lot more now with digital post-production or DV cameras that you ever could back in 2003. As for a 4K release, I do think that Sony, Boyle, Alex Garland, and the original DP Anthony Dodd Mantle could potentially work on a restoration to improve how the film looks on digital media. But of course, this is pure speculation. They could make the film look totally different and in fact crystal clear, but should they? If they mess with the original look, does that kind of chalk up as revisionist filmmaking? Would they be attacked the same way that James Cameron is being attacked for what he did to all of his big films?
Take it. Oh.
One could argue that George Lucas, who shot Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith digitally, kind of did this in a low-key way because the movies really look amazing in 4K, better than they should considering with how they were shot. But certainly they underwent something of a digital facelift, which I don't think people have really talked about, but is unavoidable considering.
Technology is used to tell a story, and that's the whole point. It's really the filmmaker and the storyteller and how well they're able to tell the story that counts in the end. The techniques they use are really a byproduct of that.
So here's the thing. These indie movies that were shot this way with these kind of primitive digital video cameras are always going to look kind of crappy. They've always been problematic in their transfer to 1080p, never mind 4K. I remember for the release of Spike Lee's Bamboozled on Blu-ray, they were able to tweak the movie's look in a way that was faithful to the original version, but still made it look better than it ever did on DVD before. And Sony could definitely use some magic to make 28 Days Later look significantly different. But should they?
I'm one of those people responsible for what you view on your idiot box.
I mean, given how the movie's look complements its tone, perhaps they'll put out two versions, one restored and one unrestored. If anything happens to the film, it'll likely be with Danny Boyle's full approval. While the original version of the film is now streaming, it does seem likely to be getting some kind of upgrade before 28 Years Later hits screens this summer, given how unceremoniously it was dumped on digital. And it has to be said, the movie is still unavailable on physical media. Sony's been really good with upgrading their old catalog to 4K with beautiful new additions, so it could be that they've got something special planned for 28 Days Later, but I'm kind of confused and maybe even a little bit concerned about how it's going to look if they tweak it too much. I'm actually kind of happy that the version that's out now is just the regular HD transfer, which really we've been seeing for a while now. The fact is, when you mess with a movie's look, it could really backfire. I mean, if you consider what's happening with the James Cameron 4K transfers for Aliens, True Lies, and The Abyss, you have to admit these movies look a lot different than they did theatrically, and a lot of fans just don't like it. But I have to say, that's nothing compared to what a 28 Days Later 4K upgrade would look like. At what point does it go beyond restoration and become something else? So, do you think that they should tweak the way that 28 Days Later looks before it gets re-released on physical media, or should they just leave well enough alone? Let us know in the comments on this video because we're dying to hear what you think.